Hi, it's Tia Megan. Welcome back to Women's History. Yesterday when we were reading from our book, we learned about Marie Curie. And today we're going to learn about Virginia Woolf, the free thinker. At the turn of the 20th century in the United Kingdom, women's lives were pretty much mapped out for them. They married young and then they raised a family. End of story. Virginia Woolf became famous for bucking that trend, becoming an author and living an entirely different sort of life. Some of her choices raised eyebrows, like questioning, but Virginia didn't care. She was doing exactly what she wanted to do, and she was making a success of it. Here's her portrait. I wonder what she did. Let's listen. Name: Adeline Virginia Stephen Woolf. Born January 25th, 1882. Died March 28th, 1941 at the age of 59. Her nationality is British, and her profession was author, journalist, and feminist. Virginia Stephen was born into a family that oozed culture. Her father was an author and a history scholar, while her mother had modeled for famous painters. Both had been widowed before marrying each other, and Virginia grew up with half-siblings as well as her own sister, Vanessa, and two brothers, Adrian and Thoby. The boys were sent to school and then to Cambridge University, while the girls were taught at home. Luckily, they had a huge library. But even though she and Vanessa were taught the classics, English literature, Latin, French, and history by their parents, Virginia was still resentful. Why shouldn't girls receive the same education as boys? Virginia had always loved writing. The act of writing was important to her. She would often hunt for a pen that felt just right. But she didn't start writing professionally until she was 18. Her very first article about the Bronte sisters' home in Haworth was published 4 years later, and she went on to write for the Times Literary Supplement. She was not permitted as a woman to study at King's College, but had to go to the King's Ladies Department in a different and much smaller building. There she met others who were keen to reform women's higher education, one of the topics close to her own heart. Although throughout her life, Virginia suffered her depression. When she was just 13, her mother died and her nervous breakdown happened. A few years later, after her father and then her brother, Thoby, died, she attempted suicide and was admitted into a hospital, suffering from anxiety and depression. Afterward, Vanessa and their younger brother Adrian sold their home and the family moved to Bloomsbury, an elegant area in central London known for its museums, universities, and medical institutions. It would soon be known for something entirely different: the Bloomsbury Group. Bloomsbury was home to so many clever, literary, and artsy people that they began to get together to discuss ideas, many becoming romantically involved with one another, including Virginia, who met her husband, Leonard Woolf. She was also involved with the famous poet and garden designer, Vita Sackville West. Okay, that's a name and a half. Vita Sackville West. Soon, the Bloomsbury Group had become famous for their modern ideas about culture, art, feminism, and pacifism. To be a pacifist means you won't hit anybody, even if they hit you. So they were against violence. Its members also became famous for their close relationships with one another. Meanwhile, Virginia's first novel, The Voyage Out, was published in 1915. 2 years later, she and Leonard set up the Hogarth Press, which published most of their works, including the celebrated novels Mrs. Dalloway from 1925 and To the Lighthouse from 1927. Her stream of consciousness writing was new and poetic, and readers loved it. Her most famous nonfiction work was A Room of One's Own from 1929. In it, she argued that in order to write, women needed to have their own space in which to work and enough money to support them while they did it. Excuse me. Privileges that were at that time often only available towards men. Sadly, World War II set off Virginia's depression for a final time, and in 1941 she filled her coat pockets with stones and walked into the River Ouse, where she drowned. But her writing lives on. Here is a quote from her. Indeed, I would love to venture a guess that Anon, who wrote so many poems without signing them, were often women. What would Virginia do? Question. You're an alien. That's seriously the only explanation. Why else would you feel as if you're different from everyone else on this planet? Should you try to change? What would Virginia do? Answer. Virginia Woolf wasn't like most people, but she accepted herself just as she was. So she most certainly would not have changed. She would have known it was okay not to be or to feel like everyone else. Who's to say they're right and you're not anyway? She might have also suggested it's possible you're not the only person in the world who feels like you do, and that sooner or later you might bump into a kindred spirit. All right, we're done with our women's history for today, and that was Virginia Woolf. Now tomorrow you're going to learn about Amelia Earhart. Until then, I'll see you at Women's History. Bye-bye.